Let's talk about one of those words in programming that sounds super complicated, but trust me, it unlocks a much simpler and way more powerful way to write code. That word is polymorphism. So let's dive in and demystify how this idea of many forms can totally change the way you code. At its core, polymorphism is an idea you see everywhere around you. Think about water, right? It can be solid ice, a liquid, or a gas. It's always H2O, but it takes on different forms. Or think about yourself. At a store, you're a customer. On a train, you're a passenger. At home, you're part of a family. Same person, just different roles. That ability to be one thing but have many forms is exactly what we're talking about in our code. And the name itself? Well, it's not nearly as intimidating as it sounds. It comes straight from Greek, poly, which means many, and morphism, which means form. So polymorphism literally just means many forms. It's this core principle that lets a single action, or a single name, be used for all sorts of different objects, and each of those objects can respond in its own unique way. Okay, so here's our game plan to get a real handle on this. We're going to look at the two main paths polymorphism can take, static and dynamic. Then we'll get into the real power player, virtual functions, and wrap it all up with why this stuff truly matters for you as a programmer. So the first thing you absolutely have to know is that polymorphism isn't just one single thing. It actually splits into two big categories, and the entire difference between them comes down to one simple idea: timing. This right here shows the two fundamental paths. You've got static polymorphism, which is all figured out at compile time. That's when your code is being built. And then you have dynamic polymorphism, which is handled at runtime, when your program is actually up and running. This whole process of linking a function call to its actual code is a key concept called binding. This chart just lays out the difference perfectly. Think of static or early binding like this. The decision is made before the program even starts. The compiler locks it in, it's done. But dynamic or late binding is where the magic happens. The decision is made on the fly, while the program is actually running. And that flexibility, that's what makes it so incredibly powerful. All right, let's start with that first path, static polymorphism. This one's the simpler of the two, because all the decisions are made up front by the compiler. No surprises later on. So the most common way you're going to see static polymorphism, especially in languages like C++, is through something called function overloading. It's a really straightforward idea. You can have a bunch of functions with the exact same name as long as they have different parameters, either a different number of parameters or different types. Take a look at this code. We have a class with 3 functions, all named func, but one takes an integer, one takes a double, and one takes 2 integers. When you write your code and call func with, say, a single integer, the compiler doesn't get confused. At compile time, it looks at the parameters you used and says, aha, I know exactly which one you mean, and it locks in that connection. That's early binding in action. It's efficient and unambiguous. Okay, now let's get to the really exciting stuff, dynamic polymorphism. This is where the program gets to be a bit smarter and make decisions as it goes. So dynamic polymorphism all hinges on this one core rule in object-oriented programming. You can use a pointer from a base class, like a shape pointer, to point to an object of any of its child classes, like a circle or a square. This is super useful. But, and it's a big but, it also creates this really specific and honestly kind of confusing problem at first. Okay, look really closely at this piece of code. We create a pointer called A, and we say it's a pointer to an A. But then we make it point to an object of type B. So naturally, when we call A func, we'd expect it to run B's version of that function, right? But check out the output. It calls A's function. This is the classic problem. By default, the compiler only cares about the type of the pointer, which is A+. It totally ignores the actual object it's pointing to. So, how do we fix this? How do we get the behavior that we actually want? Well, the answer is in one single, incredibly powerful keyword that just unlocks everything. The question we have to answer is this: how do we tell the compiler, hey, hold on, don't make this decision now. I want you to wait until the program is running and then figure out what kind of object this pointer really points to and call that object's function. So, how do we do that? And here it is, the solution. Look at that one tiny change in class A. We just added the word virtual right in front of the function. That's it. That one word is a signal. telling the compiler to set up late binding for this function. So now when we run the exact same code as before, the program checks the actual object at runtime. It sees it's a B object and boom, it correctly calls B's version of the function. So let's do a quick recap of the rules for virtual functions. First, they are the key that unlocks runtime polymorphism. You just have to declare them as virtual in the base class. After that, any class that inherits from it automatically gets that virtual property for that function. And hey, if a child class doesn't provide its own version, no big deal. The program just falls back and uses the base class's version. Now here's a classic trap that gets everybody at some point. On the left, a developer tried to override the function in class B, but they accidentally gave it a parameter. This silently breaks the virtual connection. To stop this from happening, modern C++ gives us the override keyword, like you see on the right. This tells the compiler, hey, my intention here is to override a function from the base class. If you mess up the signature, the compiler will throw an error, saving you from a massive headache down the line.
So we've gone through the what and how, but the most important question is always why. What's the real-world payoff? Why should you go through the trouble of understanding and using polymorphism in your code?
Honestly, the benefits are huge. It makes your code incredibly flexible. It lets you write way less code because you can use a single base pointer to handle tons of different kinds of objects. But the big one, the real game changer, is that it makes your code so much easier to extend. You can add brand new features just by adding new classes, often without ever touching your old code. And this code right here, this is where it all just clicks. Look at this. We have one single array of shape pointers. But in that array, we can store triangle objects, circle objects, rectangle objects, whatever we want as long as it's a shape. Then we just loop through the array and call getArea on each one. We don't need a bunch of if statements, we just make the call, and polymorphism guarantees that the correct getArea function for each specific object gets executed. That is incredibly clean and incredibly powerful. This quote from the source material just nails it. The ultimate goal is to write code that doesn't have to change when you add new types of things to your program. You should be able to add a new pentagon shape to our example without having to go back and rewrite your main logic. You just add the new class, and the existing polymorphic code just handles it. So in the end, you see, polymorphism is way more than just a programming feature. It's a whole way of thinking. It's a design principle that makes flexible, maintainable, and scalable software possible. It kind of makes you wonder, from the user interface on your phone to the video games you play, just how many of the complex systems we rely on every single day are built on this one beautifully simple idea of many forms.